Okay, hello, this is Yvette Francino again, and I'm here today with a friend and a very brilliant coach, Patti Ashley. And Patti, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us more about what you're working on these days? I know you have a lot of projects that I thought would be perfect because they all seem to do with meaningful, creating meaning and connection. And so tell us more about yourself and what you're working on.
Yeah, well, hi, Beth, and thanks so much for having me. I
Yeah.
love what you're doing with Carpe Diem. It's so important to seize the day, right?
Yes.
It's all good. It's all good for us to do. I am a psychotherapist here in Boulder, Colorado, Niwot, Colorado. I'm also an author and an authenticity architect coach. So I've combined all my years of parent education and special education and psychotherapy and created a kind of a unique kind of psychotherapy slash coaching model to help people live their best life and really excavate their authentic self.
Yeah. Great. So, if you were to give an elevator speech of who's your ideal client, what are they looking for, and what kind of services do you offer them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Women mostly, I do work with some men, but mostly women who are um, trying to find their identity. Maybe they're empty nesters and their kids have left home and they are trying to remember what, really lights them up. Or a lot of people today are asking that question too, like what's the point? What's in like this existential, why am I here? And
Hmm.
not that I can help people really answer that question, but I help them love the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So try for them to try to explore what's next for them, maybe, or how they find joy, or what would be the typical, let's say I actually do feel a little bit like that myself. And I'm sure a lot of people do while they're in COVID because it's such a transitional time for people. But on top of it, I am an empty nester. I am sort of transitioning, sort of semi retirement.
Mhm.
And so it is these transitions, I think, do kind of make us feel restless, I guess, or uncertain about what's next in life. And um, I know you have a variety of different things that you do. You have mindful meditations kinds of things, and you do live or Facebook live stream events, and even retreats, and all kinds of different things. Um, I mean, how does it? What would you say to someone like me? Would you say like one-on-one coaching sounds like the place you should be, or maybe a retreat where we have a variety of women that are working through and at the same stage of life as you, or what are some of the kinds of things, for people in my situation they might do?
Well, it's so important to be very individualized in working with somebody. And so, I have a lot of people I've worked with individually who don't want at all to share in a group. I think
Mm.
that the beauty of one-on-one is, I worked with moms for a long time. I even wrote my doctoral dissertation on women not feeling good enough. And, I've probably worked with thousands of women by now who are moms and feel like they're not good enough and they can't seem to get it right, but they think that they're the only one. So they only are safe saying that alone in a space.
Hmm.
But then if they're willing to be in a group of other women and then they feel like they're not alone, that's helpful too. But different people want different things. So I would get to know what would be most supportive of you. And that's always what I do when I work with somebody is I really get to know their story a little bit and then I start connecting the dots and what might be the most helpful. And then I'm always pulling out tools out of my bag of tricks, and suggesting, but it has to be very client centered because everybody's different.
Right.
Um, and I have some online courses that people can access on my website if they want to work individually.
Mhm.
Sometimes people are too afraid to actually reach out and talk to somebody. There's a lot of shame involved a lot of times in people's identity. And
Hmm.
that's a big piece of the research I've been doing lately is on core shame. And so when we're afraid, and Brene Brown defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we're flawed and unworthy of love and belonging. I keep looking down because I got it here. I want to say it
Hmm.
right. And she says everybody has it. No one wants to talk about it, and not talking about it makes it worse. So this element of shame, like I'm flawed and unworthy of love and belonging, keeps people stuck a lot of times from really asking those big existential questions because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want maybe to lose maybe the people around them that care about them will go away because they're asking the bigger questions. So it's really individual. I know that's a big broad answer to your question.
Right.
um, but I think one-on-one is a good start, mainly just to get to know people. I do retreats, not so much in person these days, and I haven't really got anything going online yet. But I mean, I haven't ruled it out. It's
Yeah.
really nice when we did the in-person retreats. That was super cool. I used to do weekend retreats with moms who, didn't feel good enough, and by the end of the weekend, they were like, "Oh, I got this." We did a lot of experiential stuff because we have to feel into the body um, this feeling of shame, and then healing the shame and becoming a more authentic self.
Do you ever do things that are the mother daughter to get? I say daughter just because um, I know mother daughter relationship is a lot of, I think, what you do. And also, um, my biggest struggle is more with my daughter than my sons. I think and so from what I've been reading and listening to, there is a lot of very interesting dynamic that can be um, difficult to understand between mothers and daughters. Do you have mother daughter kinds of retreats where both are together, or do you work primarily with the mother?
I haven't done that yet. My daughter and I had planned to do a retreat in southern France a couple years ago, and we didn't get enough people signed up. So we weren't sure if it was because that's a hard population to get together, or maybe it's because it was in France and it's a big investment. But my daughter, who's almost 40, is a child psychologist and a mom of two small kids. So her and I created Moms in Real Life, and we did a workshop in Virginia where she lives, and we've been doing some things online, and we actually have a course that's on my website that people can go to if they want to learn more about just parenting, but not necessarily the mother-daughter dynamic. I mean, I think her and I, it's fun. It was so fun to do it with her because she's now in the trenches of mothering young children, and now I'm in the grandmother mode. And so times have changed a lot, but the basic underlying feeling of not being good enough is still there. And I think the more we bring that into consciousness and the more that we allow ourselves to look at how that got set up and what we need to do to really feel better about ourselves and really learn about how to raise kids. So that's a different answer to your question. No, I haven't done that specifically, but that definitely is a really good, um, or probably needed kind of thing because there's so much healing. I think especially with women right now, um, so much healing around who we are as women. I mean, especially with RBG, let's just say that just happened, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
lost a woman who fought
right,
until the end and tried to even hold on even harder to make it through the election for women's rights and equality. And if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be voting as women, we wouldn't be buying a house.
right.
So our role as mothers has changed so much so fast, and there's so much around working outside the home, working inside the home. Now we've got the pandemic and we're doing it all in the home and trying to homeschool, and
Right.
so much about our identity as women gets stirred up. And so when you look at the mother daughter relationship, you can certainly see that. I am in my private practice now. It's interesting. My new intake clients have been mostly like 19-year-old college students, girls, women. And
Oh,
I'm like, this is an interesting population for that reason because, um, they're so ripe with trying to heal some of the identity around, women and women's rights and who we are and what it means to be a woman. And the restoring of the feminine. I'm all about the divine feminine, really.
Hmm.
It's a cool.
Cool. When you do your retreats, do the participants share with each other? Do they form connections? I know the the model that I've thought of, and I've thought of trying to do some kind of retreats that sort of emulates this, was when I was going through my divorce and my divorce recovery set of seminars, that the participants became so close to one another. And I think a lot of that was that shared vulnerability. Do you find that kind of thing in the retreats that you do?
Yeah, it's probably happened to some degree. I mean, they're usually pretty small. The average number has been eight, which is great because that's the number of the divine feminine. So
Mm,
obviously, when I have eight,
mm,
it's funny how that always works out. And so it's a nice, small, intimate group. And I would imagine that some of the women have stayed connected in some degree. But I think the idea of feeling that we're not alone is so important. And the way I design my retreats is I look at the themes that came up in my dissertation around mom's not feeling good enough. And each of the themes, I try and do some sort of um, experiential piece so that they're not just thinking, because we can't change how we feel about ourselves by thinking about it. If we could, I wouldn't have a job and everybody would be pretty happy. We'd say,
yeah.
"Oh, well, I just want to stop that thought, right? I just don't want to do that anymore. I want this," But it's not that easy because the body, the cellular memory, always overrides the cognitive thought. But we're so logical and linear and cognitive in our culture right now that we try and make it the change up here. So the workshops are mainly just to let's go in, let's do some poetry, let's do some dance, let's do some ritual. We have an altar, we create clay bowls,
Hmm.
we do lots of things, music and art and collage. And, each retreat I always try and do something, what that fits with the group, basically.
Hmm.
It's a lot of fun.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, what would you say from a connection standpoint? It sounds like, and I know the last interview I did one yesterday, and we really kind of discussed how it sort of starts with having a good connection with yourself, self-acceptance, and that if we can accept ourselves, and I know some of what you've talked about is that too, of knowing that you are good enough and accepting who you are, and beyond that, then, if you want to form strong connections, whether it be with your children or a new friend or whatever, what do you think is that magic moment that, what creates someone that now is a connection, a deeper friendship than an acquaintance, somebody that's just doing the chit chat and, you know, the sort of superficial acquaintance to a deeper connection? Do you have any thoughts on what kind of creates that more meaningful connection with people?
I would say it would be empathy. And if I were to rewind back to what you said earlier about connection and how we're wired for connection, but it's really that connection with ourselves, that's where we get into the core shame and that feeling of being flawed or unworthy of love and belonging. That gets set up because of some breaches or ruptures in interpersonal bridges with caretakers and teachers and friends. And so our body, our our right brain and our nervous system doesn't have enough neural connections to say I am worthy and I do love myself and I feel connected to myself. Most of us are trying to heal that. And so the way to heal that is empathy. So Brene Brown says the antidote to shame is empathy. And the thing with empathy is it's really hard because it activates the mirror neurons in the frontal lobe. So if I'm in empathy with you, I'm actually feeling what you feel. And most people don't like to feel uncomfortable. So if I'm with somebody, say, who's in grief, I work a lot with grief, that's a pretty painful feeling. And if I'm in empathy with you in your grief, I'm going to feel your grief and it's going to feel uncomfortable. And what am I going to want to do? I'm going to want to try and make it better for you.
Mhm.
But the thing is, if I'm in empathy, it's not about trying to make it better. It's about being with somebody in that experience so they can journey through it because that's the only way we can get through grief. So I think if you meet somebody and you want to make a connection, and I've even been noticing this in myself, I do it all the time. And as much as I talk about it, those who can't do, those who can't teach. It's like I talk about this stuff all the time, but I've been really conscious lately of, am I really listening to this person? Am I really in empathy with this person? Or am I going into my, well, here's an ABC 1, 2, 3 of what might make it better?
Hmm.
It's hard for us to just stay with and be a listener. And I think that's what people connect with, because that feels good. It
Hmm.
feels good to be heard. It feels good to be seen. That's what we all want. That's our innate need.
Hmm.
And a lot of us didn't get it in the way we needed it, even in what they're calling secure attachment. We talk about attachment styles in early childhood, and the secure attachment is the one where you should be okay. But I think that my theory is none of us have had a really secure attachment, because we're still cleaning up some of the old do as I say, not as I do. You should be ashamed of yourself. Let the baby cry. Don't be angry. Stop crying before I give you something to cry about. And so we've all had elements of that. It's in our DNA. And so to learn how to be in this large empathy is, I think, the answer. In a long way to say that, the answer to your question is empathy.
Yeah, but that's very interesting. And um, I probably could talk to you, and I probably will talk to you about this for hours, because I've had so many discussions with trying to understand. My family's all very left brain and we're all very logical. So we're kind of lacking a little bit in that empathy area. I would say my ex-husband, myself, and my 3 children, we've all kind of belabored that we're so far on the logical scale and the rational versus the more emotional and empathetic. And so are there skills, are there ways to develop empathy if it's not sort of your natural personality, if you are more on this left-brained logical side of things, and your natural sense is to be, well, let's fix that problem. Let's not talk about it. Let's, you know,
Hmm.
and I know in fact, I said this on another one of my podcast episodes, is it, I get frustrated almost. It's hard for me to, I almost feel like I'm enabling sort of a victim mentality sometimes if somebody is, I know they just want support, but I feel like, let's, you know, I, I don't want to support this negativity. I want to say, let's figure out how we can fix this and have a solution. But I know that that is not in being in empathy, exactly as you're saying. So are there exercises or classes or things that help for people that have a personality type that is really much more on the logical, let's fix this side, to say, let's develop your empathy skills?
Yeah, it's tough. It's kind of like if when I think about extroverts and introverts, like I'm an
Hmm.
introvert, and so this pandemic for me has not been that challenging. It's still challenging even for an introvert, but an extrovert must feel excruciatingly pained by having to minimize their amount of time, because extroverts get energized by going out, introverts get energized by going in. So it's the same thing with, well, similar to the right brain, left brain person, the person who's more logical and linear versus feeling and sensory. I happen to be more right brain, so to me, the left brain stuff is hard. The structure and the analysis and the wanting to fix. I'm all about let's feel the feelings and let's move through it. So but I do notice, in clients, and like you were describing, people who, I mean, we live in a culture that's very left brain, and I think it's really hard for a lot of people to allow the feelings to move through and be what they are, because the left brain is what makes up the cognitive story to help us feel emotionally safe. So the work that I do is really about finding ways to feel safe, and maybe moving beyond a little bit of the logical linear thinking, and dropping. I always say, let's drop down. What does that feel like in your body? And it's hard for some people. So that's why my new book that I have has worksheets in it, and just some exercises to help people kind of sort of analyze. It's kind of a combination. My work's kind of a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and psychoanalysis and a bunch of other things, that I found in my work that are helpful. So I don't, again, it's all very individual. So people have to give themselves permission basically, and also not be judgmental if it feels so hard. And that's why I did the extrovert introvert example, because it's excruciating for me to be around people 24/7. I get exhausted. And so I can only imagine that an extrovert would be the opposite. They would be pained with all this inner alone time, that a lot of people are spending. And it's the same thing with the right brain, left brain preference. However, we're always moving in the direction of health and wholeness, which is, as Carl Jung says, the inner marriage, the balance of the right left brain, or the inner
Hmm.
anima, animus, feminine, masculine. And I hate to use that word because it isn't about gender, but people think gender, but it's really right left brain. It's really logical and emotional. We want a sense of wholeness and
Hmm.
balance. And a lot of people, lean one way or the other. And so I guess my work is really helping people integrate
Yeah.
the two parts and being aware that, like, I appreciate you saying that, because it's very true. I had one client come in and she says, I'm very cerebral. And then, we would work with feelings, and she'd come in, I have a lot of feels today, And so if the story got set up that says I'm safe in my logical mind, that keeps me emotionally safe, it's going to be really hard to allow oneself to move into simply being with the feeling.
Hmm.
Not impossible, but it's also, that's where you have to come back to self acceptance and compassion in the process,
Yeah.
because it isn't easy for anybody, because this is, I always say, it's brand new, hot off the press. I mean, if you think about what we know now about our social emotional self, we didn't know until the mid 20th century when we started researching ourselves. And I also say we're the only species that has to research itself to understand how to get along with each other. So we're cleaning up thousands of years of not having much awareness about our emotional self, because life was really about survival. Lifespans were much shorter. We certainly didn't have the internet. We certainly didn't have the ability to connect with so many things globally the way we do now. And the education and technology, and the part that's always been lacking is this other piece of our social emotional self. So it's brand new. So you have to be really patient with yourself and not think, well, what's wrong with me? Because I don't know about that feeling thing. And just go, wow. I always say this is brand new. We're writing a brand new story. It's never been done before. So you have to be really kind to yourself.
Yeah. Well, Patty, I have one sort of final question that I wrap up with about meaningful life. What does a meaningful life mean to you, or what suggestions do you have to the audience out there about how they can live a meaningful life?
Well, I don't know why freedom just came to mind. The idea, and I always like to play around with acronyms. And so when I was looking at the word self, SELF, I thought, what is a self? And I thought, well, maybe it's a safe experience of living freely. And so I think we're all wanting that. And I think we're pretty far from it. I don't think a lot of us feel very free, especially now with what's going on with the pandemic and the political climate and the climate change. And so many things keep us feeling kind of trapped. And so I think that's living our authenticities, giving ourselves permission to explore what really lights us up, even when we feel like we have restrictions, and maybe think outside the box. I have a course on my website called Go In, Not Out that I designed at the beginning of quarantine to help people, kind of give them some skills to do more of this going inner work, introspection, and really asking themselves those questions and giving yourself permission to ask the questions,
Oh,
and
yeah.
be willing. It takes courage, compassion, curiosity, courage, and connection.
Yeah.
So
All
important.
those all those C words.
So many
Um, I,
shovels. Yeah.
do you want to tell, I will write it in the show notes and on the blog post, because I know a lot of times it's hard for people to know the URLs and things, but do you want to tell briefly the best way to find you online?
Yeah, thanks. So it's my website is pattyashley.com and I spell my name with an I. So that's Pattiashley. And everything's on there. You can, the courses I talked about, my books, link if you want to schedule a session with me, some videos and some other interviews that I've done. And yeah, you can find
Yeah.
everything on pattyashley.com.
All right, Patty. Thank you very much. Thanks for being with me today here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Yvette.